Hello and welcome to Exchange with Mark Eddo. I'm Mark Eddo, and this is our fabulous new studio in the heart of London. On this show, you'll meet millionaires, musicians, mavericks, and decision makers. Fascinating people you'll really want to hear from.
You can see quite clearly the influence of ancient Greek architecture in this column here behind me. And also somewhere here in this temple complex, there's an inscription in Latin on one of the walls.
You just need to walk the streets of Lagos and see people doing creative things all the time. We've always had this creative energy. It's always been in Africa. It's always been there.
Despite the chaos.
Despite the chaos, and maybe because of the chaos.
Yeah.
Success needs to be defined by the number of lives you're changing and not by the wealth you're accumulating.
All of us before the election.
We became friends immediately, in that instant.
To quote Bob Marley, if you know your history, then you'll know where you're coming from. For Africa, understanding our history helps us to see how we got to this point in our development. The big question, though, is where are we going and how can history in Africa show us how to get there? Our next guest explores these questions in her new TV series, The General History of Africa, and many of you will recognize her as one of the BBC's most accomplished journalists. Zina Badawi, welcome.
It's great to be on Exchange with Mark Eddo. We're going to have some exchanges, are we, Mark?
Yeah, but yes, we are going to have some exchanges. So this is a 20-something part series that you're doing with UNESCO about history. Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's based on volumes compiled by UNESCO over many, many decades, but the programme is being made by my own production company, Kush Communications. I'm making the programmes available free of charge. Yes, I did say free of charge.
That will make them sit up.
Yes, to all African state TV stations, as well as countries in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Why? Why is history so important? Why should we know our history?
You're African, I'm African. We should be proud of our history because we have a long and proud history, which has often been overlooked. Basically, in the early 1960s, the newly independent African leaders, Nkrumah, Nyerere, and so on, said, look, we've decolonised our countries, we want to decolonise our history. So UNESCO scoured the continent of Africa for the best African experts. So this is Africa's history written by Africans.
And that's an unusual bird's eye view, really, of African history. What surprised you?
What surprised me is actually how rich Africa's history is. But what really, really inspired me and made me very passionate about this is to hear African experts, or ordinary African people even, talking about their legacy, their history, and you actually see that they are more than experts. They feel the history in a way that a very committed Western historian who has studied these countries may have the passion, but I just felt that they brought something different.
And I know that you're a big believer in Africa's future. How do you feel about where Africa is right now?
Of course there are setbacks, but if you look at the trend lines, I am an optimist when it comes to Africa. And that's why if you don't control your narrative from the past, it's very difficult for you to suddenly say, hey, I want to jump on this train.
And that's what this history thing is about,
exactly.
Right?
I really do want Africans to see just what a great continent they live in, and what a great past it has had, what a great present it has, and what a great future it has.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you. You're a great guest.
Thank you, Mark.
Let's just take a peek at a little bit of it.
OK. At Merowe, the Kushites embarked on a big building programme. You can see here at the ancient site of Musawarat clear evidence of temples and we think also palaces and other monuments.
If you think you're not creative, our next guest will tell you that's simply not possible. EJ Nwokori believes we are all naturally creative, but sometimes our creativity is trained out of us. EJ is the CEO of the creative consultancy Wolff Olins. Welcome.
Thank you.
So this universality, if I can call that, of creativity is not a new idea for you. You got it in a village in deepest Niger. In Nigeria, right?
Well, I think I trace it back to growing up as a young kid on the streets of my village, which is not in a big city like Lagos or Abuja or Kaduna. It's a It's a small place that at that time didn't have electricity or running water. And having moved there from rural Pennsylvania in the States, and going to this place where, you know, if you wanted a toy, you had to create it. And if you wanted to have fun, you had to create that fun. And really beginning to understand that we didn't even have a word for creativity.
In the language?
In the Igbo language. It's just the closest word you can get to a phrase I would call akonuche. It's kind of a human ability. It's like you have intelligence. So it's not something that some people have and some people didn't have. It was something that we all possess.
And getting it trained out of us, or in some cases, if you're in Nigerian schools, beaten out of you?
Yeah, you know, and the funny thing about the Nigerian school system, I think, for all its flaws, is that it too required you to be creative.
Yes.
You know,
getting to school is a creative act.
Getting to school without,
because I grew up in Nigerian school too.
So you know the feeling, and I do think the problem with that is that there aren't creative industries for people to really participate in. But I don't think that the education system in Nigeria, because of its lack of facilities, I don't think that it trains creativity out of you. And I think that's why, you know, you just need to walk the streets of Lagos and see people doing creative things all the time.
You see it everywhere.
Everywhere.
But when it comes to African businesses, I mean, if you say you're a creative consultant and you need to be more creative, they will say, what is that? I mean, right?
Hey, the first thing I'd say is that I see a lot of creativity in African businesses. And again, for exactly the reasons we were talking about, I actually think Western businesses struggle more with thinking about creativity as a core capability of everybody in the organization. You know, they hire people like us to help them be creative. I think the problem for African businesses is the flip of that we've not created the structures for creativity.
So how do you approach it as a global CEO? Do you have a global strategy, or do you say, look, we've got to have this approach for this part of the world and that?
So I think one of the fascinating things for me, and this has happened in my career, and I would say even in the last 10 years, is that location is becoming much less a definer of people's attitudes to the world. I meet 24-year-olds in Lagos who have more in common with a 24-year-old in San Francisco than I do. Yeah, you know, they are. There is a ferocious optimism now amongst that generation. So these younger guys,
the younger generation, is defined by their generation, regardless of where they are.
Yes, and their attitude
and
to
their
the world.
tastes and their interests and all the rest of it, and then that changes their approach considerably.
Yes,
I want to talk about something. I used to be a reporter in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom from '96 to 2000. I saw companies go up, go down, and I remember interviewing Steve Jobs a lot. And one thing that Steve Jobs always did was he believed in the brutal simplicity of thought, call it that. He was always going, keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. If someone came and designed a phone or a computer, it wasn't right, he sent the whole team back to make it more easier. Because what he thought was that you've got to remove the steps between you and the consumer, between you and the audience. How important is simplicity in creativity?
I think it's incredibly important. But simplicity has to have a purpose, and Steve Jobs got this. I think a fundamental, and this links back to creativity, if you think about creativity as finding radically different and radically better ways of doing stuff, that allows you and that forces you to really think about who you're making something for. And that can be a really great simplification exercise, because all of a sudden I can eliminate everything that isn't of use to the person I'm making it for. That's the purpose of simplicity,
It's
not
about
just simplicity.
stripping away things.
It's about stripping away, because I am laser focused on the problem I'm trying to solve. I'm looking for the most creative solution to that problem, but to that problem, nothing else.
Stripping away the extraneous.
Yes, that's critical, and Steve Jobs was the master of that.
We want you to speak to CEOs out there in Africa who are watching this and going, okay, how can I become more creative? What advice could you give them in 1 minute?
In 1 minute, I would say trust the young folk, because particularly in Africa, we haven't yet trained that creativity out of them. So trust them, empower them to do stuff. Now, in a world where we can all get the same efficient machine, the thing that makes all the difference is actually the creativity. So provide a really efficient platform for people to do work, and just really define people's jobs, to its creative essence. Lagos is a place that I know in Africa better than anywhere else. We've always had this creative energy. It's always been in Africa. It's always been there.
Despite the chaos.
Despite the chaos, and maybe because of the chaos.
Yeah.
So I'm stupendously optimistic.
Now, two of the most creative people I know, EJ Nwokori and Zina Badawi, thank you.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Who wants to be a millionaire or a billionaire? Everyone, right? But how do you become one? Even with the most amazing business idea, there are so many obstacles, so many challenges. You'll need a massive amount of determination to succeed. Just ask Ashish Thakkar. Even though he dropped out of school at 15, Ashish Thakkar is now one of Africa's most successful entrepreneurs, employing thousands of people. Oh, and he's about to go into space. Now, I'm going to use a term that's often used to describe you as Africa's youngest billionaire. Does that rub you the wrong way?
I think I'd love to be seen as a young African entrepreneur who's trying to be disruptive, who's trying to make a difference on our continent, and who's trying to change the narrative alongside many amazing individuals such as yourself.
Thank you.
I think wealth is celebrated too much, whereas, I think success needs to be defined by the number of lives you're changing and not by the wealth you're accumulating. And therefore, as a business, you've got to make sure you're profitable and extremely beneficial for your shareholders, but it's also making an impact. It's also making a difference. The Mara philosophy has always been doing good and doing well, in that order.
And now Mara does what?
The Mara group is really focused on 4 businesses now: banking, real estate, infrastructure and technology.
And I know that you have Atlas Mara together with Bob Diamond, formerly of Barclays. Just give me a quick synopsis of where we're at the moment when it comes to investment into Africa.
Look, I think anybody looking at our continent with a short-term lens shouldn't come in the first place. I think our continent is a medium to long-term investment destination, and anybody looking at it through a medium to long-term, in a medium to long-term context, I think there's no better investment opportunity than Africa. Again, it's investing in the right sectors, it's investing with the right people. It's a great opportunity, and there's so much to do.
The Mara Foundation and Mara mentorship is something that you talk a lot about. Unemployment is a huge problem across Africa. This is something that you're tackling head on. Tell me just how important that is.
I'm glad you raised this, Mark. I think it's absolutely crucial. And look, unemployment is a global issue. Youth unemployment specifically, I think, is more of an African issue because of our young demographics. So you're spot on. I think, historically, our governments have been focused on foreign direct investments and large projects.
Thinking money is going to solve the problem.
Thinking large industries or large projects are going to solve our unemployment issue. However, with the level of automation and everything else in place, it doesn't create the scale of employment you think it'll create. So the answer really to this issue, in my opinion, is nurturing small and medium enterprises. It's truly enabling, empowering and inspiring young entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs across our continent. And that's what the Mara Foundation is very focused on. So we have the Mara Mentor Program, which gives guidance, advice, hand-holding, support, training and competitions to these young entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs on their phone, free of charge.
Now, the final frontier, as they call it, space. What's an East African doing in space?
So I'm Africa's second astronaut. I'm super psyched. It's amazing. The Virgin Galactic journey has been so exciting. It's been truly phenomenal. We're not rushing it. Obviously, it's a return ticket, so I will be coming back.
What does it mean for you, Ashish?
The adrenaline, the excitement, the ability to think about things in a complete different way, and how we leverage off this to make our youth dream in the real sense.
So if you had 1 minute in an elevator with some eager young entrepreneur, what would you tell them? What would be the piece of advice?
I think I would tell them to dream really big, but start really small. And I think entrepreneurship is a journey, it's not a destination. And the last piece is stay on course, don't cut corners. You'll get plenty of opportunities to cut corners, but don't. Stay on course.
Ashish, as ever, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
The late, great Afrobeat legend Fela Anikulapo Kuti.
Kids, louder!
world famous for treading his own path. Joining me now is Fella's longtime manager and close friend, Ricky Steen. Thank you for coming on, Ricky.
You're very welcome, Mark.
I'm not saying the wrong thing when I say long time. You've known Fella and the family for 35 years. Take us right back to when you first set eyes on Fella.
Well, I met him in the late 70s. Fella was in London. At the time, I was putting a rainforest festival together. So I put a Moroccan-bound leather proposal together and went and banged on his door. And it was in the winter, and I was wearing a hat and a coat and a scarf. Come in, because he used to leave the key in the outside of the door. I went in, and there was Fella sitting in his Speedos, surrounded by beautiful girls. And it was hot, because he used to carry extra heaters in addition to whatever was
So he brought the African sun with him to Ebola.
Yeah. I sat down next to him, and I gave him this folder, and he opened it and started looking through it, and I was talking into his ear. I can't explain what happened, Mark, but at a certain point, he turned around and looked at me, and we just both started to laugh.
So you connected, basically?
We became friends immediately, in that instant.
Fella is just one artist that you've managed. I mean, people might not know this, but you were the one that organized the first ever European tour for Jimi Hendrix, of all people.
Yes.
And you've worked with the Moody Blues, you've worked with a lot of great artists. But it seems like Fella is closest in your heart. You've described yourself as the self-appointed guardian of the Fella legacy. Why?
Yes, because I loved him dearly, and because I respected what he stood for, and because I found, you know, somebody that was ready to take the licks that Fella took.
There has not been anybody in this whole politics in Africa. Only two people have walked on the streets to follow people to where they are going. Nkrumah and my mother. What are you talking about? All this nonsense that you have hanging around here. They sit down in cars, man.
He had scars all over his body. He was arrested 200 times in his life. But he never stopped the guy. He'd say, ah, well, they didn't kill me. and he'd still be there. I found that to be astounding and worthy of respect. And
were you there during the times, I mean, arrested? We know the story that he was arrested and released, and he was oppressed, and the Calcutta Republic was attacked. His mother eventually died from that experience. So you were there during the low times as well, as a friend. So you saw him at his lowest, right?
Yeah, but he always bounced back.
Why do you think that is?
Because he had this tremendous, what's the right word, impulse to change things. I mean, we have to remember that he came from a family of social reformers. You know, his elder brother was Minister of Health and went on to become Secretary General of the World Health Organization. His younger brother was President of the Nigerian Medical Association and also Chairman of the Campaign for Democracy.
His mother was the first African woman to drive a car and also met Chairman Mao.
Yes, if you look at that history, you realize that Fella, you know, he was playing what he called the underground spiritual game.
What does that mean to you?
What it means to me is when, let's talk about it in musical terms, when he was on stage performing, he would tune every instrument
meticulously.
Personally. And so the music comes off the stage and it reaches the audience, and the audience responds. And that energy, let's call it, goes back to the band, and then the whole thing lifts to that place where we would all love to live our entire lives, at least speaking for myself.
And that's the underground spiritual game.
That is the underground spiritual game.
And so 35 years, many people don't know this, but I actually can hear it in your voice, that you're almost like an undercover Nigerian, an undercover African. I'm surprised you don't finish your sentences with "oh." Oh. Yeah, but you are really, I mean, you love Africa, don't you? It's really part of you.
A long 40-year history of a love affair with Africa, let's put it that way. You know, I love the music, I love the culture, I love the attitude, there's so many things, and I'm amongst those who consider that Africa has a tremendous contribution to make in the world that we've yet to see.
And I know you've been working with MTN, haven't you?
Yes.
Getting Fela into their hands.
We signed with MTN Group to make Fela and other artists that are on our label available to their 229 million subscribers in the form of full tracks and also these things called CRBTs, which I love, you know, caller ringback tones. So when you call somebody in Africa, instead of hearing buzz, 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 you hear music.
Everybody run, run, run.
And then a voice says, if you like this music, press 1. And then you press 1, and then you've got the music.
Okay.
Everybody knows Africa has to be united now to have any headway. But how is it going to happen? It's a good question. If I can take this country, then Africa is settled. Once there's a good government in one African country, the whole of Africa will be liberated.
If Fela were alive today, what would he think about Nigeria now?
He would be intensely disappointed because, unfortunately, his message from 35 years ago is still relevant today. There's still the same confusion, still the same lack of electricity, what is a problem, health.
Water, light, food, a house, as he said. Yeah.
All these things are difficult. One can only hope that things will improve. Nigeria is they're a freedom-loving people. You know, I go to Nigeria a lot. I love it there, despite the confusion. You can't explain it, never that necessarily, but I love the energy of the place.
Then it's wonderful to have you here on the couch, Ricky Steen.
Thank you.
Former manager of Fela and
you.
his close friend. Thank you.
Good to be here, Mark.
Thanks for joining me on Exchange with Mark Eddo. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll leave you now with another rare glimpse of the Afrobeat legend, the Black president himself, Fela Anikulapo Kuti.
All of us to the first election. And the second election all in Nigeria. And the second election like it was a pass. Babala nonsense. He passed the rigging. He passed corruption. Which kind of election be this? Babala nonsense. Babala nonsense.